Evening, Southside and Southside everywhere, family. I hope you're doing well on this fine night on February the 19th on President's Day. Hope you're doing excellently well. And I want to welcome you to the conversation on tonight because you know what it is. You know it's 7 o'clock p.m. East Coast time, and it's a Monday night. So that must mean that it's time for the MMR, the Monday Message Recall, the opportunity we take to recap the sermon that was delivered yesterday at the Southside Church of Christ, 800 Elmira, Durham, North Carolina. If you're there and can attend in person, we love to have you. But if you're not able to attend, you can always join us virtually on either Southside's Durham's Facebook page or on our YouTube channel or within the Southside Everywhere community. I'm John Merriweather, the online minister for the Southside Everywhere campus, and want to welcome you to this conversation on tonight. And look, you already know what the rules are. You already know, unless you're a first timer here. And what we do if you're a first timer, we just go through the highlights of the sermon because we do realize that sometimes you may have been busy. It may have been flowing so fast that you missed something and you want to go back and revisit so it can sink in and so that you can apply it to your life. But also we do know that there are some that may attend elsewhere and did not get a chance to be with us in service. And this is an opportunity for them to see what we talked about and see if there's any nuggets or any jewels that they can glean from it as well. And this is an interactive experience, so we want you to be active in the chat, and we want you to put your comments in there as well as we recap the sermon on tonight. So as always, I'm going to go ahead and ask my friends and family in the chat to go ahead and put the title of the sermon on yesterday up in there so that we can go ahead and have this conversation on tonight. And look, if you're so willing, if you're so able, somebody that did not attend service yesterday, go ahead and invite them to the conversation on tonight. You can share this on your Facebook page. You can share the link from YouTube on your Facebook page, or you can send it out via text. Go ahead and get this word out, because I'm telling you, the word on yesterday was a word that I guarantee that somebody needed, that somebody that can help somebody as they're living in this life, because we're dealing this year with overcoming. We're in the mindset of being overcomers. We want to learn how to deal with the tests and the trials of life in such a way that we can be victorious, that we're not always behind the eight ball, that we don't lose our footing, that we don't get knocked down and stay down. Come on, somebody. We're learning on how to be what Christ has planned us to be, which is overcoming, because he told us to fear not. He had overcome the world. And if we are in him, then we should be overcomers as well. But that does not mean that it's not going to be difficult. It does not mean that it's not going to require us to do some work. We're going to have to do the work so that we can become what he always sees us being. Come on, somebody. I think that's a word even on tonight. And so on tonight, I see somebody has already dropped it in there. I'm going to jump on Facebook real quick, because I see we got Sister Bert up in the house. Sister Bert dropped it in there saying 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 23 through verse 28. Get over it. Sister Tiki T up in the building on tonight says get over it. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to have a conversation about how to get over it. And so I know that might be offensive to some, but stick with me. Give me 30. Give me a strong 25. Can you give me a strong 25 on tonight? Can you give me a strong 25 to explain what we mean by that? And so, as always, we're going to go ahead and we're going to start off with the scripture, 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 23 through verse 28, so we can set the foundation of this conversation on tonight, so we can learn how to get over it. And so on tonight, if you have it, go ahead and type in the chat, I got it. And if you don't have it, it's all right. You can go back and rewind it and get it, pick up when you get it, all right? And it says, are they ministers of Christ? I speak as a fool. I am more. In labors more abundant, in stripes above measure, in prisons more frequent, in deaths oft. Of the Jews, 5 times received I 40 stripes, save one. Thrice was I beaten with rods. Once was I stoned. Thrice I suffered shipwreck. A night and a day I have been in the deep, in journeyings often, in perils of water, in perils of robbers, in perils of my own countrymen, in perils by the heathen, in perils in the city, in perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea, in perils amongst false brethren, in weariness and painfulness, in watchings often, in hunger and thirst, in fastings often, in cold and nakedness. Besides those things that are without, that which cometh, that which cometh upon me daily, the care of all the churches. All right, Sister Nikki up in the house. Good evening, Sister Nikki. And so y'all go ahead, and as we said in this conversation, we're learning how to get over it. And this is a conversation from that text we see the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul was one of the apostles that wrote most of the New Testament. And we see that he's painting this picture that his life was not all glitter and gold, that his life was full of struggle, that his life was full of challenge. And he was pointing this out. He was talking in context about these individuals, as Brother Thomas shared with us, that they call themselves super apostles. Those are people that think that they are above the calling that Paul had received, and were trying to discredit Paul because of the sufferings that he had undergone. They were saying that because he was suffering, that disqualified him to be an apostle. But what Brother Thomas was sharing with us is that he wasn't suffering because he wasn't an apostle. He was suffering because he was an apostle. If you go back to Acts chapter 9 and you see when God was speaking about Paul and sharing what Paul was going to have to go through, he said he is going to have to suffer much for my cause. So this was all part of his life. But as we look at it on tonight, what Brother Thomas said by this title, Get Over It, can be triggering to some of us. And he gave an example of how he was, while he was early raising his boys, he used to try to rush them to get over the pain that they experienced when they would fall, when they would hurt themselves, when they would experience something that may have hurt their feelings. He would encourage them to get over it, and that's because he wanted. We're taught in this society, and we're even taught in the church that our boys need to be men, that they need to be strong, that they need to be. They need to be solid, right? We don't want them to be weak. We don't want them to be I was about to say gentle-minded, but that's not the word. That's not the right word. But we don't want them to be feeble-minded. We want them to have some toughness. We want them to have some strength about him. But in that, we are trying to tell them, and he learned that he was teaching them that their pain was insignificant. And we say to move past, we tell them not to cry, right? We tell them, be a man. But these are children. They're learning. They are trying to understand. And sometimes we can make the pain worse when we try to ignore what just happened. Come on, somebody. We can make the pain worse. We can set in trauma. We can reinforce trauma. We can induce trauma by trying to tell them to hurry up and get over it, because what we're implying is that if you hurry up and don't get over it, then you aren't on the path to becoming a man, and that you are weak, and that you are frail, and that's something that we have to be very careful of, because that can give the message that anytime you can't get past pain and you can't put it aside quickly, then you are not being what you were designed to be. And so he wanted them in the mindset to be stronger than he was. And he said, but what he reminded us too is that it's okay for us to be sensitive. It's okay for men to be sensitive. It's okay for men to have these feelings. It's okay for men to feel pain. It's okay for men to feel hurt. But the thing is, we can't stay in that hurt. We can't operate in that place of pain. And if we don't learn how to deal with it now, then we will keep carrying that pain and keep making that pain grow instead of dealing with it, acknowledging it, and moving forward with our lives. And so he said, that he is now creating them a space. He is now creating them a room for them to express the pain that they're feeling and express the pain that they're going through and express their emotions in a healthy way instead of putting the cap on it and keeping it piled up and pushing it down until one day it just erupts and boils over. How many of us know that many a man has lost their mind and lost their temper because of pain that they kept pressed away, and now it reaches a boiling point and it comes and it spills out and spills over and not just hurts themselves but hurts others that are around them. And so he said at first he realized that he wasn't giving them space and he didn't provide them a space because he wanted them to be better than what he was. But here's the thing, we're oftentimes not making them better, we're making them bitter. And so what he did was by starting to give them the space, he found an avenue to help them deal with their emotions in a healthy way. And some people were frowning upon it and some people made their faces about it. But he said, how many of us still do things that are unhealthy when we know to do better? We know that children need to be able to talk. We know that children nowadays have a lot on them. We know that it's an epidemic of children taking their lives. Why? Because they didn't feel like they were able to express their failures, their setbacks, their disappointments, their hurts. And we are losing the next generation because we're not giving them spaces to be able to operate safely and receive the encouragement that promotes healing and not the encouragement that promotes them to just ignore what happens. And so we know that we don't get over trauma. We heal from trauma. Let me say it again. We don't get over trauma. We heal from trauma. And what I mean by that is that we don't place it in a rear view and ignore it like it never happened. We acknowledge it. We learn from it. We learn healthy ways to deal with it. And then we learn how to speak from a position of power instead of a position of pain. And he said that trauma can be anything. And he said there's three, and he says we have to be careful from trying to distance ourselves from trauma and think that we'll be all right, because just because we distance ourselves from it doesn't mean that we dealt with it. Because there are traumas that we may have experienced in high school or back at home or even in church that when we re-enter that atmosphere, it bubbles back up and we don't know how to operate. We don't know how to deal with it. And so he says that there are different causes of trauma. And he said there's three main areas or three main types of trauma. He said that there's an acute trauma. There is a trauma from a one-time event or experience. And I shared before, my aunt, when she witnessed a car accident and witnessed the loss of life, she is traumatized to the point where she will not learn how to drive. She will not drive a car. She rather walk or have somebody else drive her. Why? Because of the trauma that she experienced from witnessing that accident. Some of us, we've gone through natural disasters. For some of us, illness has been traumatizing to the point that when something flares back up, we start feeling the anxiety, right? We start feeling the fear. We start feeling the nervousness about it. Some of us going through COVID was a traumatizing time. Some of us were around when 9/11 happened, and some of us were in New York when 9/11 happened, and some of us were in Virginia. Some of us were in Pennsylvania when 9/11 happened, and all those things, right? We've lost loved ones. Some people have lost their businesses. Some people have had difficult childbirth. Some individuals have experienced miscarriages, right? And when they receive the gift of life again, that anxiety pulls up, right? Because the trauma. Come on now, we got the acute trauma, we got the chronic trauma. Chronic trauma is the long-term response to a repeated event. That's something like bullying, like racism, like pornography, like alcohol, like drug abuse, like sexual abuse, right? Something that happened repeatedly over and over again. And now you have a response. And then there's also complex trauma, which is a mixture between the two, and it affects our physical and mental outlook, and also affects and caps our spiritual capability, because we only operate to the level of the trauma that is set in our mind, and that ceiling that we keep bouncing against, and having and thinking that God is limited because we have not yet dealt with the trauma. And so the list goes on, and no matter what we've been through or what level we're at, we have to understand that it changes our perspective of life. And if we don't, it's nothing that we can just move past, but we must work on doing the steps to perform, to experience the healing that is possible through Christ Jesus. And now we must look at the past, so that we can, and deal with our past so that we can embrace our present and live and prosper in the future. And so on tonight, I want to give you three things, and I'm going to try to hurry up here. It says that anybody can anybody that can teach us about how to deal with trauma is the Apostle Paul, because Paul experienced trauma from Jesus Christ himself. Remember, Jesus knocked him down on the road to Damascus, blinded him for 3 days, had him to move, and having to be led by the hand and be taught by somebody else, and receive the healing after he had obedience, right? But how can we worship God, a God that allows traumatic experiences in our life, but claims that he loves us? How do we do it? Many of us, and we talked about that on this morning, on the morning sip, many of us, when we experience traumatic experiences, we go back and we blame God, and we point the finger of God and tell God, you enabled this, you allowed this, it's what you have put in my life. So how can you claim that you love me and you allowed this to happen to me? Well, Brother Thomas wanted to help us through this, and he gave us three steps to look through, and three instances to look at, and then also encouraged us to participate in Bible study on this Wednesday, where we will have a panel of experts that specialize in life circumstances and trauma, and giving us the practical tools on how to overcome. But here's the first thing. He said we have to learn how to process the pain, and that we can't run or hide or lie about what has occurred. We must learn how to process the pain. And now these individuals were trying to tear down Paul, like individuals try to tear down us, and they try to tear down our confidence and our credibility. But Paul stood in his confidence, and we had to also stand in our confidence as well. And that as they tried to discredit him, that it shows that I'm an agent of God. And look, the trauma in our lives, it doesn't discredit us from God's love. It doesn't discredit us as a person. And I know that there's certain types of embarrassment that may come about it, but look, we have to accept the fact that just because we're a victim of trauma doesn't mean that we lost our value as humans, that we lost our worth, that we lost our importance, that we lost our dignity. We have to allow, we have to go through the process to understand that we can't hide what happened. That's what Paul was saying. Paul named down all the things, all the hardships, all the difficulties that he had in his life. And it's all right to let people know what we've been through. I was bullied growing up. And so there is a certain amount of trauma that I had. That's why I learned how to be so quick with my mouth when it came to when somebody would snap at me, I could snap back, and snap back even better, to the point that I could force another person to tears because I had been forced to tears. But that was the trauma in me coming forth, and after learning about that, coming to the point where I had to learn how to let some people be ignorant and not let them, what they say, destroy the confidence that I had in myself. All right, Gracie White, good to have you here on tonight. And so he says the best thing to do is put forth the image that is our authentic self, being truly who we are, and being, and he said, here's one of the things that we can find where we're not, to define if we're being authentic or not. And he said the thing to determine if we're being authentic or not is in those situations where we want to say no, but we go ahead and say yes, or we want to say yes and we say no based on how that's going to make the other person feel about us, based on the fear of rejection, based on the fear of abandonment. And because we don't want to experience that pain again, what we will do is we will hide who we really are in that moment, and let and give the person what we want to appease them. But he says, when we prioritize protection over connection, and sometimes the only way that we can heal is in community. And what we allow trauma to do is to force us into isolation. And when we're forced into isolation, that gives the devil opportunity to operate on us even further. And that goes for the individuals that speak to themselves and say, I hide in isolation, but I heal in community. We can't heal by ourselves without the help of Almighty God. And that's, many of us are staying home and not in community, and we still haven't found the tools to get over the pain that we suffered in times past. But we turn to these false substitutes, these false prophets, and things that keep us lifted up. That's why he didn't say it, but I'll say it. That's why recreational drug use is going up, because it elevates us above the pain. But the thing is, when we come back down to realize the pain is still there, we have to find another high to elevate us again. And he said that is we use it as a traumatic bond to help us get past that. And some of us, it's not drugs. We use food as a drug. We use alcohol as a drug. Some of us bury ourselves in our work, and we don't deal with the issues that we're having in our relationships. It doesn't fix or heal the problem. We use some of us use sleep as our drug to ignore the pain, but we still have to deal with the pain. The pain is still there. I see you. The pain is still there when we awake, when we come down off that high, when we come out of that method of escape. So we still have to deal with the pain. We have to find a healthy way to process it. And then he says we got to press towards God. And press means that we had to push through. We had to push things out the way. Pressing is work. When Paul says, I press towards the mark, that's not an easy thing to do. That means that you have obstacles in your way, and you're willing to take on the obstacles because you realize that where you are is not going to benefit you. You have to move beyond that point. And so he says, we have to learn how to take our trauma to God and not hide it, because here's the thing. God already knows. And like we studied on the morning sip this morning about Adam and Eve, they hid themselves from the presence of God, but God already knew when they started talking and they described their condition, what they had already done. He knew that they had disobeyed them. So God already knows that we've experienced a hardship, that we have experienced a disappointment, that we are wounded. And so we got to realize that God already knows it. So what is the shame, and why are we hesitant with sharing with him what he already knows? There's no embarrassment. There should be no embarrassment. There should be no no hesitancy, because if we can share it with anybody, we can share it with God, because we can't change our past. But what God can do is change our heart and change our minds and how we look at the past, so that we can operate in the present. So only God can change what has happened. And he may not change the event, but he can change our perspective of the event. And he can change the purpose of that event, because you look at it. Look at, I think I want to go, and I think I want to grab Joseph when he was, no, not Joseph. Not Joseph. Yeah, it was Joseph. Yeah, it was Joseph when he was in Egypt, and he met his brothers again. And his brothers, who had abandoned him, had tortured him, had thrown him away to be carried away, had lied to his father to say that he was dead, and how they came into the palace in a time of need. And he said these powerful words. He's like, what you meant for evil, God has turned it around for my good. And let's understand that the Old Testament method of how God works is still carrying over into the New Testament, meaning that God had the power to turn things around that people meant to destroy us, that people meant to hurt us. He could turn it around for our good. And he says, and that leads us to the next point. Hold on. Before I get to that, sometimes God will give us affirmation to confirm that he has called us to what he's called us to be in private. He said, God called Paul, gave Paul a vision of heaven. And remember, Paul had a dream. He said, and he's like, whether I was in the body, I could not tell, or out of the body, I could not tell. He said, I was called to the third heaven. And he said, and after God gave him that vision, God gave him a thorn. And that thorn, Paul had requested for it to be removed 3 times, but God wouldn't take it away. He said he gave him grace. He said, my grace is efficient for you, is sufficient for you. And so God gave him the ability to endure instead of removing it. And God oftentimes won't remove the event of our trauma, but he'll give us the grace and the power to endure. And sometimes we don't understand that God has graced us. And God's grace is enabling us to stand, to be able to operate, to be able to see there was a purpose in our pain. And that brings us to the next subject, which is pursue the purpose of our pain. Look, sometimes we wonder why we get so frustrated. And and just like me, I get frustrated when I see my children or somebody else's children being made fun of or being bullied, and that will draw a fire into me. I'll be like, hey, y'all leave that kid alone. Hey, y'all leave him alone. Or I go to speak to the parents, the students at school, not the students at school, the teachers at school, and be like, okay, we need to have a conversation, because what we're not going to do is allow my child to be bullied and think less of themselves and be in an environment where they don't feel like they can learn safely and honestly. So we got to understand there's some, and that's all because of I've experienced that pain, right? Some of us have experienced our pain so that we can advocate for others that are in the process of coming through or don't know how to advocate for themselves. So we have to look at the signs. Sometimes we get angry or frustrated, and that's because God is calling us to work in a ministry, but also that is a sign too. If it allows us to get to the point where we start shutting down, where we can't operate, where we begin shaking and stuff, y'all know what I mean? That we just feel like we're going to fly off the handle and just lose it. That is a sign that we have unhealed trauma, and we need to seek additional help so that we can operate from a position of wholeness and being healed instead of a position of pain and anguish. And he says, sometimes in those situations, we try to grasp and control others. We try to grab control of the situation. But he says, when we're in a moment like that, the only thing we can really control is ourselves. And some of us need to learn the discipline that comes from the Holy Spirit so we can have that godly self-control and not that humanly self-control where we see that we're going to say what we're going to say, that we're going to do what we're going to do, that we're going to give a piece of our mind to whoever we feel like we need to give a piece of our mind to. And so he quoted that there is a greater purpose because God confronts us so that we can comfort others through the pain and the struggle that we've experienced. And so look, sometimes our greatest ministry comes from our greatest pain. And he gave the illustration of Horatio Spafford, who was a businessman who lost his businesses in the fires of Chicago, that had also experienced another financial difficulty because of the economic turndown in 1863. And so he had an opportunity to get back on his feet, but he had to go over to England to do so. And because of previous commitments, he sent his wife and his daughters over before him and he said, I will catch up with you over there, and thinking that everything was going to be all right. But unfortunately, there was a tragic accident. And because of that accident, I believe his 4 daughters, I believe he had 4 of his daughters. He had 4 daughters. His 4 daughters died in an accident of that ship, and because of that shipwreck. But his wife was able to reach England, and she sent the telegram back. And because it was so expensive, because the limited technology, she had to be very concise and to the point. She said to him, basically, she's like, all gone, arrived alone, something to that nature, to let him know that his daughters had passed away. And so while he was traveling over to England to be with his wife, to to recover his business and pick up economically. He had the sorrow that was weighing upon him. And as they sailed past the point where the ship had gone down, where the ship had crashed, where his daughters had perished, where his little girls or his girls had gone to meet their heavenly reward, he penned these words. He's like, when peace like a river, come on now, when peace like a river attended my way, come on now, when sorrows like sea billows roll, he's like, whatever my lot, that have taught me to say, it is well with my soul. He suffered trauma, but he turned and used that trauma to pen a song that many of us use to comfort ourselves in our moments of struggle, in our moments of personal pain, that we sing to ourselves to lift our spirits up. That song would never have existed if he didn't go through his pain. Now, what pain, what ministry, what assistance, what help can you offer to somebody else because of the pain that you've gone through? I had a gentleman share with me, Brother Eric Smith. He's like a additional father to the gospel to me. He was my first youth minister in Metropolis, Illinois. And he shared with me a testimony by a gentleman that had lost his family, lost his wife, lost his children. And he went up to him, he hugged him, and he asked him, he's like, how are you holding up? He's like, anything I can do. He said these words. He's like, the Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And he was moved by that. And it was encouraging to him because he's like, this man has lost his family, but yet he is blessing the name of the Lord. And that just let him know, he's like, whatever he is facing, he was going through something at the time. And he was like, whatever he is facing, he's like, he can face that. If this man can lose his wife and lose children, he's like, I can face what I'm going through because I haven't lost that much. Yes, it's a struggle, but I'm encouraged by his faith. And sometimes we got to use our faith, our testimony to encourage somebody else. And that was an encouragement to me. And I'm here to encourage you that God is with you, and that just because you experience hardship, trauma, or pain does not mean that you're any less of a Christian, does not mean that you're any less of a person. But if we're going to deal with it, if we're going to get over it, if we're going to be overcomers, we have to remember, just like Brother Thomas shared with us on yesterday, we have to remember that we have to process the pain. We have to seek to prioritize protection over connection, and we have to seek the purpose of our pain, and we have to press into God. We have to take it to God, and that's the MMR on tonight. I hope that helped you. I hope that served you. Look, I'm sorry, I meant to be clicking the messages and the comments that's over here, but I got wrapped up into it, y'all. I'm sorry. I was trying to stay on point, stay on task, but we got some great messages here in the chat, and so I appreciate y'all coming through on tonight. God will make us stronger, and I pray that if you need help to deal with your trauma, that you will reach out and receive the help that you need, because God does not intend for us to walk around wounded and in pain. He wants us to experience life and experience it more abundantly. So come back tomorrow night if you're part of the community, and we will have community prayer night on tomorrow. We will pray for whatever situation, whatever issues you have, 7:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in the Southside Everywhere chat. And if you want to be part of the community, if you're looking for a place where you can grow spiritually and that you can maintain or develop or cultivate your relationship with God in a safe space, come join us in Southside Everywhere at www.southsideew.com. We would love to have you. We love to be to assist you in your pursuit of Jesus Christ. I thank y'all for all the encouragement on tonight. And also, as a reminder, this week's Bible study will not be broadcasted online. It will be broadcasted through Zoom. And so if you want to be a participant of that, check your emails. And we look forward to learning how we can use some practical tools in dealing with our hurts, dealing with our harms, dealing with our trauma, so that we can begin and continue the process of healing so that we can minister to somebody else. All right, family. Thank y'all for coming out. 5 minutes over. I'm sorry. Forgive me for that, but the conversation was good. Appreciate everybody sending some love in the chat. But y'all know what I'm about to do on tonight. I'm about to go get something to eat. All right, y'all take care. God bless, and we'll catch you next time. Love y'all, family.